So hello, everybody. Good morning to the participants in Malaysia to this international conference on Kalimantan studies. I am very honored to give you a little bit of a lecture. This morning I have prepared a PowerPoint. Let me find it. Then we can start. Here we go. Okay, and then we make it bigger. Extend that. From the beginning. Oh yeah, here we go. So my presentation is entitled In Search of the Emotional Homeland in Middle Indonesia, a case study of the Pojok comments in Arcaya, West Kalimantan. And here you see a picture of this newspaper that's no longer around. It was published between 1981 and 2002 during the so-called New Order. It's now the Pontianak Post. So what is this Middle Indonesia all about, and why do Pojok comments could play a role? Well, first, let's have a little bit of an observation. In the last recent years, we saw the Indonesian president, Joko Widodo, Jokowi, dressing up in various regional costumes all over Indonesia. I tried to find examples from Kalimantan in the south, here at the bottom. This, I think this is South Kalimantan, hopefully I'm right. On the east, East Kalimantan, and on the right, East Kalimantan. And on the left, I Googled Jokowi Kalimantan Barat, and I found this picture, but actually it is from a website that is criticizing President Jokowi for dressing up in regional costumes without paying much attention, otherwise, financially at least, to the regional communities, the Masyarakat Adat. So this is from an NGO from West Kalimantan, Aman, Kalimantan Barat. And you see that there is apparently something going on in the relations between the center and the regions. In Indonesia, there is some kind of a need of politicians from the center to dress up in, at least to dress up in regional costumes, while from the regions, there is protest. Sometimes people are happy that they are represented on the national stage, of course. But there is some kind of a, sometimes kind of a criticism that not enough is being done from the center or by the center for the regions. So if you see this observation, this is from 2024, very current discourse, then we try to find out more about it, what's going on, why are the centers, why are the regions in Indonesia so important suddenly? And they were not like that. Well, do you remember President Suharto dressing up in a Dayak costume? That didn't happen. So what was going on? First, let's go to the library and study a little bit history of theories of development. On the left, I have a very famous example, is Walt Rostow, The Stages of Economic Growth, an American book from 1960. There was a Studi Club Modernisasi in the late Sukarno period in Jakarta that read this theory and other theories. And they would be very influential, inspiring for the incoming new order in 65, 66, and for the new economic policy. So basically, you can think that the economic strategy since 1966, beyond 1998, also the current governments, is basically based on elements from the modernization theory, which is a pro-market economy, a systematic long-term development strategy, broken down in, say, Repelita 5-year plans. Its export orientation includes green revolution in the agricultural sector, food production, for instance, places a great emphasis on education, on infrastructure, new roads, new airports, all sorts of train lines, new harbors. Infrastructure is very important, electricity grid, you name it. Emphasis on public health is not just that only a few should get developed, but for the entire country. And this, as you can see here, these 5 steps upwards also include a constant move of the entire economy moving up the value chain. So that's why in a moment, making Indonesia 4.0 makes perfect sense. It's basically the continuation of a very long-standing kind of economic strategy. Since 1966, that's very long, it's almost 60 years. Now, in the course of this development process, something happened, namely new middle classes emerged. There were, for the beginning part, understudied. Then there were studies about the new middle classes in the big cities, in Jakarta, and Yogyakarta, and Surabaya, and so on. And in the mid-2000s, researchers realized that the middle classes are also to be observed outside of the big cities. They play a role, for instance, in Kalimantan. And so there was this exploration of so-called middle Indonesia, the middle classes in Middletown, in provincial middle towns. It was led by Professor Gary van Klinken, had a consortium of mainly Dutch institutions, the Research Institute KIT Leuven, the University of Amsterdam, University of Leiden, Institute for Social Studies in The Hague, but also had participants from Indonesia, namely in this case from Universitas Gadjah Mada, Yogyakarta. And so the research ran for 7 years, had a lot of salaried positions, produced a lot of conferences, a lot of publications. I have here only two from this chain of production. And so basically, the assumption is that the regional dynamics in Indonesia have too long been overlooked, at least by foreign researchers. Yet they're highly relevant for political, social, cultural fabric of the nation. And hence, there's something that makes complete sense to have something like a conference on Kalimantan studies, an international conference on Kalimantan studies. Would also make sense to have one on Sumatra studies, on Java studies, and so on, Maluku studies, Sulawesi studies, and so on, because the regions of Indonesia are so important that, as you just saw in the first slide, the president is dressing up in various regional dresses. So this is something that we see from the library, but actually I know something that did not start in 2005 with the middle classes. We have to be able to locate this emerging of the new middle classes in a certain decade. It's the 1990s, late 80s to 1990s. So here we have a picture of then Vice President Triso Trisno, who was Vice President from 1993 to 1998. And right next to him is a picture of Ben Mboy, who is the former governor of Nusa Tenggara Timur, East Nusa Tenggara, Flores, and so on. And he was in the years from 93 to 98 a head of a Studi Club Decentralisasi set up by the Vice President, Triso Trisno. I know that because if I move my own picture, no, perhaps, what happened? There we go. Here we go. So now let's go back. I know that because on the right you see Dr. Ramdustami Entoda, who was a saudara sepupu, a relative of Ben Boy, also from Flores, East Indonesia, who happened to be the lecturer of Bahasa dan Sastra Indonesia in Hamburg, where I studied. Was my teacher. And when in the 1990s, Triso Trisno and his Studi Club Decentralisasi were looking for examples to be studied. One of the examples was West Germany, Federal Republic of Germany. And so Ben Boy asked his saudara sepupu, Dr. Ramdustami Entoda, to give him books about German federalism. And so I was a small young student back then, and I went to the university library bookshop to buy these books that were then sent to Indonesia, to Jakarta, to Ben Boy, and they would read those books. And the conclusion was the German model was not suitable for Indonesia. That's why the decentralization that was then cooked up, was prepared, was not from the center to daerah tingkat satu, to the provincial level, but tingkat dua, to the districts, the kabupaten, and so on. So that is the outcome of this Studi Club Decentralisasi. And when President Habibie came into power, this discussions had already happened. So he had something in the drawers that he then could realize and put into a law. So that means that in the 1990s, 1993 on, the government of Indonesia under President Suharto already saw there's a need to decentralize. And the need to decentralize came from them realizing that there are all these new middle classes that want to have more say. And at the same time, the level of problems would get too complex to be solved alone in Jakarta. So the story of this decentralization of Indonesia is actually that of the New Order government that realized that something had to be done. And so if you go back and want to understand why, what they thought about, we have to go back to the discourses of the 1990s. Late 80s, 1990s, to understand what was the setup there, how was the discourse going on and what was the precursor of the so-called Middle Indonesia, a phenomenon of the mid-2000s and early 2010s that Leiden and co studied. So my case study are Pojok comments in the daily Arcaya from Kalimantan Barat from 1996, January. I have two research questions. One was the settings, and the second one is the stylistic features. So here's again a picture of Arcaya, and then Arcaya means something. It's in the coat of arms of West Kalimantan. It's explained also on the web pages of the government of West Kalimantan. It means in Indonesian "takunjung binasa." So basically, never give up. So Arcaya means something. It's the flag word of the entire province. And if a newspaper is called after the flag word, the central key term of the provincial government, then it means something. This newspaper is important. This newspaper, Arcaya, published Pojok every day except Sundays. So I went to the library in Leiden, I think in this case. I went to, got 26 Pojok comments that were published in Arcaya in January 96. So this is a mixed method. I look at every single comment, Pojok comment, individually, but then I can count features. So I can see a pattern that is bigger than this one individual Pojok. So it's a mixed method, qualitative, quantitative. Okay. First of all, what are Pojoks and what is the field of Pojok studies? Pojok consists of two parts, a short summary of the news report and followed by humorous, witty, critical or cynical comment. Look at the left. There is a Pojok from Kompas, from the internet. Dinasti Atut, masih kuat kuasai Partai Golkar, uang punya kuasa. So that's the second part. This is a cynical comment. So you would read that in Kompas, you would read that in many other newspapers. Some say the Pojok are a typical Indonesian phenomenon that is not to be found anywhere else in the world. So that might be something to investigate. Typically for these Pojok, they have a column name. So they have always on page so-and-so of the newspaper, they have a name like Di Pinggir Jalan or Di Warung or Mang Usil or Pawang in the case of Arcaya. So Pojok pretend to be the voice of the people. However, they're a means of inter-elite criticism. You have to understand that newspapers are expensive. Normal people, poor people cannot buy newspapers. They would not be interested in the stories in the newspaper. These are elite people, middle and upper classes that are able to read newspapers, serious newspapers. And something else in the history of the Pojok Indonesia, there were the Pojok wars, Perang Pojok, in the Demokrasi Terpimpin period, late 50s, early 60s, when President Sukarno had this Nasakom coalition, Nationalisme, Agama, Kommunisme, with the various parties had to be affiliated, and newspapers affiliated with the parties. And so because the ideological tension, say, between the religious party and the communist party was so strong, there was the Perang Pojok wars. Heavy criticism between the members of the regime coalition. And so in the 70s, early 70s, they even thought of, for some time, let's outlaw Pojok. In the library on Pojok studies, you find mostly contributions on the Pojok from Jakarta, national media, like here, left-wing example, Mang Usil from Kompas, well studied, including about language and so on. But the question is, how are the settings and the stylistic features of Pojok from regional media, for instance, from Arcaya, from West Kalimantan? So based on my methodological approach, I can omitted lots of tables, and I found out that the provincial level features about 6 out of 26 Pojok are set in the provincial levels, talk about provincial authorities being treated as provincial celebrities. It's about the society life of Pontianak, rarely about something of national or Southeast Asian interest. 3 times something that concerns the Islamic Ummah in particular. But most Pojok in the sample, 17 out of 26, are talking about things that are going on in the districts, the Kabupaten of Kalimantan Barat. So that's where the life apparently is situated. And so there is not an even distribution. The Arcaya Pojok are featuring mostly areas that are around Pontianak. 61% of the readers are in Pontianak, and hence most of the Pojok are on something happening in Pontianak, in the capital of West Kalimantan. Interesting finding. So at the same time, you find also that you have, in terms of stylistic features, you have a lot of personalized stories. It's always somebody who is doing something. It's not an anonymous event. It's somebody doing something. It's personalized. Mostly it's celebrities. While if you have groups of people like fishermen, school children, or villagers, these are being presented as stock types. So you have the individual elite, individualized elite, and you have the stock type rakyat. First part is always in standard Bahasa Indonesia, newspaper language. The second one is sometimes, but rarely, with colloquialism. I found one Javanese loanword, like in the example below. And there are usually humorous elements. They play with role inversion, with surprising perspectives and combinations. So we can understand it's interesting to read Pojok. If you are buying the newspaper, you're becoming a part of the readership of maybe the provincial elite of West Kalimantan in this case. So you know some in-stories, including gossip. So to summarize, we have here in the fact that Kalimantan studies are increasingly relevant together with other regional studies of Indonesia. It's because apparently the economic development strategy has been so successful that there are more and more people out in all over Indonesia who want to have a say, who are conscious about themselves, who study themselves, who have invite other people to study them. So this kind of regional studies with Indonesia is a phenomenon I think that will continue, and this conference is a beautiful example for that. So yes, various disciplinary approaches are important, including regional media and regional opinion cultures, just as regional cultures in general. Today, of course, not only print media, but also internet media. So if you're going back to the sample, the case study of today, then we had the Pojok of Arcaya from January 1996. That gives us a little bit of an insight into the social life of West Kalimantan in mid-1990s. It was the reported social life was mostly elite celebrities. They're being highlighted, a little bit ridiculized, not too harsh. And while the rakyat, the people, the common people, they are portrayed as in group portraits, fishermen, school children, villagers, and so on. So if you think of the situation back then, newspapers were also not so inexpensive back then. So reading the Pojok every day, buying a newspaper every day, gives the readers insider knowledge about important people and events in society and politics. And so this is a social function to include the readers of this newspaper into the elites of the province in this case. Yes, and we have these humorous elements playing with role inversion, but actually reaffirming the social structure. So I would think this is a small little window into the 1990s. We have many other windows today in the conference and tomorrow. And so I do wish you good luck and thank you for listening, and bye-bye.